Hello and welcome, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Good News Doctor podcast. And I have a very special guest today, Dr. Adena Blickstein, and she is from Connecticut. And I had recently done a trip up there, and we were doing a health fair, and I was blessed to meet her. And we spent an afternoon talking about all the different things that we do as practitioners. And so I thought, you are somebody that I absolutely have to have on my show. And so, as you know, I always try to bring guests out here that perhaps have been traditionally trained and then all of a sudden have some sort of aha moment and like to go outside the box of typical what insurance covers and what people traditionally try to do in their health, which we know is usually masking a symptom, not always getting to the root cause of things. And so our platform here was designed to help people learn that there's other choices out there and there's other things that we can do that can absolutely impact your life in a way to give us that leg up on healing and have a breakthrough to a new experience of quality of life. It's not a matter of if you're going to get a breakthrough, it's when is the next one coming. And so often you have to actually swim out to it. Don't wait for your ship to come in. You need to actually be proactive and go find it. So Dr. Adena is she is a psychiatrist, medically trained, which means she can prescribe medication for people. She is from New York and licensed in New York and Connecticut, and she teaches people all around the world. She's unique because she's not just trained in adolescents and children, but she also works with doctors. She teaches providers how to connect the relationships, really, is what it is. And so she spent years as, like I say, a clinically trained medical doctor prescribing meds for different types of psychological issues. And she saw what it was doing to the patients, and she felt there had to be a better way, but she was kind of stuck in the program that she was in, had an aha moment, and then literally realized it's all about connections. And we're missing the component of parent-child communicating and connecting. And this is where we're going to find so many more breakthroughs that we've been traditionally missing. So she has a master's in public health. And as I said, she teaches all over the world, helping providers understand that there's more than just drugging your patients and hoping that they get by in life. We need to help them learn to be present, express themselves, and truly live life to the fullest. So welcome, Dr. Adena. I'm so happy to have you
Thank
as our
you so
guest
much.
today.
Thank you so much for the lovely introduction.
Oh, you're welcome. So tell us a little bit about, after this aha moment, what was the thing that really was different between the traditional type of care and now we have this, as you've shared with me, like this new connection, like the relationship part of this bond with children and parents?
So, generally, as a psychiatrist and a child adolescent psychiatrist, we see the patient as the child. The child is the patient. The child needs the treatment. And initially, when I worked in my practice, that was my focus. A parent came in saying, "We have a dysregulated child. The problem is that the child isn't listening, and the child is angry, and the child is depressed and alone in his room." So I would go and I would see the child, and I would focus on medicating the child or doing therapy for the child. And intuitively, I realized that really wasn't the root cause of the child's problems, because the child is raised in an environment and all of the issues, the dysregulation that we call, which is like anger, aggression, or depression, is stemming from a reaction to something in the environment. So generally, they're reacting to something either in school or something at home. And so I started changing the way I evaluate children. And instead of focusing on the symptoms of the child, I started focusing on where they were dysregulating. So if it was selective dysregulation at home and it wasn't in school, the problem is likely at home. And if it was selective dysregulation in school and not at home, the problem is likely in school. And then I started digging deeper, and I started going into the school systems and then talking to the teachers. And if it was at home, I would go into the home and do home visits and interview the siblings. And I would find out from a sibling, oh yeah, dad has anger explosions, and mom, when that happens, mom shuts the door and doesn't talk to dad. And I would start learning about all these things that were happening. And I started to realize that the dysregulated child is coming from a poor parent-child relationship. And then my treatments focus on repairing, assessing the status, the health status of that relationship, repairing that relationship, and then reassessing the health status. And it's been incredible. My outcomes have been incredible. And the psychiatric symptoms that my kids come in with, once they start working on that with that focus, just they're just like gone.
So what you're telling me is that most problems between parents and kids is the same thing that's between husband and wife, communication. I mean, what
Essentially,
it
yeah.
all boiled down to, it's how you're interpreting your situation. And if there's lack of communication, that relationship just has bigger and bigger gaps
Yes.
in how I'm thinking and acting around the other person, because everything goes back to communication, whether it's my body communicating with itself or whether it's me communicating in my environment. And so, that's a brilliant assessment. And why that isn't just part of standard protocols, that's where it should start. It makes sense as you laid it out like that. And it reminds me when I was practicing in northern Georgia, it was in a very rural area. And so we had lots of farmland around there. And there was one high school that kind of supplied a big area of land, I should say, a big county. And there was repeatedly about 20 or so kids that were always late to school. And they kept getting tardies, and then eventually they got expelled because they were late. And they got a notice sent home to them saying that they had to go to court and talk to the judge about getting back into school. And both parents had to be present. And so they had literally 20 pairs of parents come into the courtroom with their child. The sheriffs all entered, locked and chained the doors, and they had a court order to drug test all the parents. And 95% of them were tested positive for methamphetamines. And so their theory was these kids aren't late because there's a problem with the kids. There's a problem at home. And this was like the meth capital of the country, apparently, where most of it was being made. So it was a big crackdown to try to find out why are these kids having such dysfunction. And it's because their home environment was way off. And so they stepped in and did something about it. And half the community was irate, that's not fair, that's entrapment. And the other half was like, yay, they finally did something about the drug problem in our town. And so, but it goes right with what you're saying. There's always something going on in an environment, and that has a cascading effect and a ripple effect through their friends, through their relationships, through their school. And it can go the other way too. They're having
Yeah.
issues at school. If they don't communicate back with their parents about the things that are stressing them out and the things that happen to them that could be devastating, they're going to create a limiting belief about it and then have that impression of themselves all the way through adulthood. And so, we've been very blessed where our kids would always come home and just tell us anything and everything. And we've been a very open relationship and never made them feel that they couldn't do that. So how do you actually start talking to a parent when you realize it's the parent that is having these arguments with themselves and their child's in the other room listening to it? Like, oh, they're not hearing me, they're sleeping. Or,
Yeah.
there might be in denial. How do you get through to a parent when they're saying, I want to pay you to take care of my kid, and then you turn around and say, actually, there's a bigger problem here? And is it received, or is that difficult?
Well, I don't like to target an individual. It's not the child and it's not the parent. It's
Okay.
an entity on its own. And that's the way they relate to one another. It's the relationship. It's the entity of the relationship because each person on their own might be fine, but in the way they're relating to one another, there are problems. And so when I put it that way, it kind of takes the judgment out of what we're trying to achieve. And to have a healthy relationship, it requires that each party changes or relates better, but it's not really anyone's fault. And what I like to say is that all of my parents are well intentioned. I think most parents are well intentioned. They want the best for their children, but they're poorly skilled and they don't have the skill set for authentic relating. And largely
Mm,
that's because of the way they grew up and because of the way society has, I guess, indoctrinated people, which is basically control. A lot of parents believe they're doing the best for their children, but they act in very controlling ways. And whenever a parent
mm,
tries to control their child, they push them away, they distance their child, and they cause
mhm,
breaches in intimacy. So when you
mm,
described my kids felt really comfortable talking to me, what I call that is askability. You had a very high askability score, which meant your child felt really comfortable asking you questions. And that is because of the way you related to them. You weren't necessarily judging them. You were opening up your heart. You were listening to them and you wanted to hear what they have to say. When a parent is not an askable parent, they're generally very judgmental, critical, controlling, and largely
mm,
outcome dependent, in which they really want to see outcomes in their children. They want to see grades, they want to see performance,
mm.
and the intimacy or the relationship itself is not a priority. And it's not because they don't want it to be. It's simply because it's new for them. It's a new paradigm.
They don't know how to
They don't
because
know
maybe
how.
they were never related with their parents.
They were
Do you
never, yes.
think it plays a huge role if they had a single parent, or if it came from somebody that had both parents at home?
A parent who was raised with a single parent or both parents?
Yeah.
No,
Do
because
you, okay, go ahead.
because it's about belief system. So if a single mom, for example, raised a son, but the single mom in her mind had felt she was totally supported
Mm,
and had everything she needed and was totally loved, that's going to come across irrelevant of circumstance. It's about mindset. And you can have a married, partnered mother who feels terrible, unsupported, totally resentful and angry. And that's toxic. It has nothing
mm,
to do with marriage, divorce, single, double. It has to do with a person's belief system
mhm.
and the nature of their relationship. I have married people that are married that I work with that are really bad, not in good relationships. They're not happily married. It doesn't service the child to be in
True.
that dynamic at home ever. And I have parents who are divorced, separated, but they're co parenting in a wonderful, empowered way. So I try to break a lot of stigmas
Mm,
about, um, I don't want to get divorced because of the children. And I go like this and I say, it's not about marriage or divorce.
okay.
It's about your level of empowerment and your confidence and competence that's going to affect the child.
Yeah, I hear that all the time too. And I study people's brains, and I have adults that have such high anxiety. And we train and train their brain, and it calms down a little bit. And then a month later, it's right back to where it was. And we calm it down, and it's right back to where it was. And I'm like, there's something else. And then, like, there's nothing else. And then they come in, Doc, I just got divorced. Can I get my brain mapped? It's been 30 days. And I'm like, okay. And everything's perfect. It's like all great. It's like, hey,
Right.
I think you found the cause of the
Right,
root of your stress, you know?
right,
So,
right,
sometimes they hold on for the wrong reasons because I promise till death do us part, and there's no communication, and it's causing both parties more stress.
right. And it's about a
Um,
skill. Really, it's about
yeah.
skills, you know? I think it's people have the desire, but they don't have the know-how.
So when we talk about know-how, in studying the brain as I do, there's a network in the brain called your executive functioning network. And this is the network that kicks in whenever you're actually around another person or around a group of people. And it gives you mental flexibility, self-control, and working memory so that you can pay attention to what's going on and then engage in the actual conversation of what's been said, not change the topic and talk about something else. And so that's actually developed as a child when you're 3 to 5 years old. And if during those 2 years, that part of your brain developing, if you were not played with and loved on constantly, like you are the center of this universe, you are so special, and we love you, and all of that, it stunts the growth of those parts of the brain. And then they go into adulthood, and like you were saying, they just don't know relationships. They don't know how to properly communicate. It's not like they're disruptive and rude and say the wrong things. They just don't say something that would have been appropriate to say, like thank you, or you look nice today, or something that could go a long way by just acknowledging something. And they think of it later, like, oh, I wish I would have said that when that person said something. Or they just always feel a little awkward around people. Now, we've learned that you can develop that network at any time in your life if it never was developed, but it plays a real key role in this relationship bonding thing that you're speaking on. And so, you know, tell me a little bit about that age group. Is there other things in the adolescent time right there that's, super important, that if you see things, you need to kind of address that to the parents right away, that, this is a warning that we need to address this because down the road, that's going to turn into XYZ?
So relational repatterning, which is what I do,
Hmm.
essentially when I go into a family and I formulate my psychiatric assessment, of course I do the traditional modalities. I do suicide risk assessments, I do the anxiety scales, I assess for psychosis, I do substance use screening, I do a lot of things, but the more innovative assessment piece that I have included in my practice is my relational assessment, or what does the current relational patterning look like, because our brain develops through accumulative transaction. That's how our patterning develops. Our brains are
Hmm.
basically wiring, and they developed through transactions, and especially in our relational patterning develops through relational interactions. So our
You
brains
mean
develop.
repeated relational reactions?
Right. So our brains develop through patterning anyway. Like that's how we learn. That's how we
Hmm.
accumulate information and knowledge. Repetition, repetition, repetition with reading, with math, with any type of learning, with motor skills, with driving, with executive functioning, with brushing teeth, and all those things. But from a relational standpoint, our schema, our idea of how to interact relationally comes from our parents. So if there are
Mm.
toxic interactions, right? So a child comes home, I got a B. Um, Parent says, "What? What the hell? You're stupid." You're that right? All that negative stuff. Child goes to the room. So that's a retreat or avoidance. So that relational patterning, and it continues and accumulates. That's how they're going to react in any relationship. They expect criticism, so they have a fear reaction when it comes to performance. Then they have an avoidance reaction because they don't want to face the critique, and that will repeat and repeat. It will repeat in coworkers, it will repeat with friends, it will repeat with lovers. It will continue to repeat because that's the patterning in the brain. So when I look at a family, I can immediately understand where their relational patterning is, and then I go to self-reporting. I love self-reporting. Self-reporting means that I ask the family, I ask the parents, each parent, where would you rate your relationship with X child from a scale of 1 to 10? Please tell me your rating. It's very simple, because a lot of times parents no, it's pretty bad or pretty low, right? So we do self-reports on the parent, we do self-report on the child. From a scale of 1 to 10, how good or bad is your relationship? Then I do a comparison. And then I have a conversation, right? And then as we do treatments and training, we reassess and reassess and reassess. And my goal, and I'm pretty successful after someone finishes my class, they're starting with a 0, and then I have self-reported 10 10s.
Oh, that's great.
And the way I describe it, because it's a different way of thinking, is imagine two people with a wire. 0 is just like a thin wire. There's just no opening. It's just like a tiny wire connecting you two. Sometimes it's totally severed. That's when there's like more extreme circumstances. But imagine it's a tiny wire, no communication. A healthy relationship is this flowing, huge opening of light, tube of light, going, flowing back and forth, totally open, totally free of flowing energy. So where are you? You know? And then we start doing work that really starts with the parents. And I'll give you a very quick example. It's very simple. I have on Instagram, I do a parent tip a day. But a lot of parents, they want to know about their child. They're like, my child's so closed. They're not opening up to me. I want them to open up. I said, stop interrogating your child. Don't ask them how their day was. Don't ask them how they feel. Share how you feel. Share how your day went. Share what you did for the weekend. Share what excites you. Share what makes you nervous. When you start sharing your humanness with your child, when you start opening your heart up, a child's going to open up.
Wow. That's brilliant. I've never heard that advice before.
And
that is absolutely brilliant.
it changes everything. And my personal story. I used to be an ex-narcissistic parent because I tried to control my children. And I got that feedback from them.
Wow.
And
isn't it great what we can learn from our own children? I mean,
yeah,
my kids teach me stuff every day, and I'm just like in awe, just so proud of that.
yeah,
So let me ask a question on the other thing that you were saying.
yeah.
So I've dealt with a lot of autistic children throughout my career. And initially, it was always just the moms coming in, kind of wanting to work. And I'm telling them, how we're going to help this child and how we're going to work together. And over the years, the dads started showing up with the moms. And nowadays, when I do these conferences and I'm speaking around the country and there's thousands of people in the audience, I'm seeing like half dads, where years ago it was all women. And so um, I already kind of know the answer to this, but I'm saying it for those that are watching. How important is it when you're, trying to bond this connection, even if the mom's the one at the house 90% of the time, the dad works all the time. How important is it that the mom and dad are on the exact same page and learning this together so they're congruent and consistent with the messaging that the child is hearing and receiving?
Well, I always say it only takes one person to change an entire family.
Mm,
Because when one person changes their relational pattern and their reactions, it's impossible to regress
mm,
because there's no feedback. So, for example, yesterday I worked with a family and they used to be very critical and judging. Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do this? And of course, the child would just lock themselves in their room. Suddenly, the parents are now curious about the child's life and asking curious questions without judging. The child isn't going to retreat. There's no reason to. There's no reaction to be had.
mhm.
So if only a mom comes to my class, and I know that I always encourage, both parents, but sometimes it's not always feasible. It's okay, because if one person is changing, everybody has to change.
Mm. it's kind of a cascading event. You know,
Yeah,
it's one bit of positive change, especially if the rest of the family sees all of a sudden the dynamics different, it it spreads. So that, I guess that makes sense. That wasn't the answer I was expecting. I
I
was
know.
thinking like, oh
I
yeah,
know.
we have to have both parents or it doesn't work. But
Look, it's
you know,
ideal. The more,
again,
yeah, the more people
yeah,
that learn, the better. But when someone shifts, everybody has to shift because otherwise it wouldn't make sense. The dance is over. It's like a tango, right? If a leader is leading a different step, the follower has to follow.
yeah, that's awesome. That's fantastic. Um, At one point we were talking how you give the patient the permission to express anger. What does that look like? Is it because they got a lot of spent up anger inside, kind of like one of these rooms where they can go in with a sledgehammer and break everything, or just sit there and scream at each other at the top of their lungs and
Yeah.
cuss or whatever? I mean, like, is it just to let it all out so they get it off their back and now we feel better? Or tell me a little bit about that.
Anger is one of the most powerful and important human emotions. It is critical to have a healthy relationship with anger and in a balanced way. And here's what I mean. Repressed anger causes a person to be sick, that person who has the anger. Explosive anger causes pain to others.
Mm,
Expressed anger expressed is a force for shifts, healthy shifts in a relationship. It's a request for an adjustment. This isn't working
mm,
for me. We need to do this change. I'm frustrated because my boundaries weren't honored, and this needs to happen. It's always healthily expressed anger is forward thinking. It's emotive. It's proportionate, and it's always with an eye towards the future.
mm. That
So
was very deep.
learning, a huge part of what I do and a huge part of what
Hmm.
toxifies relationships are the extreme on either end, either repressed anger, unexpressed, or explosive. These two extremes toxify relationships. And so I have a systematic approach that I go through. It's a script. Sometimes it feels robotic, but the more it's practiced, the better a person gets. Someone who's repressed will have a hard time actually doing it. Someone who's
Mm,
explosive will have a hard time restraining themselves. But
mm,
the point is to get to a place in which anger expression is like number two. You poop 3 times a day, you express anger, whatever, as often as you go to the bathroom. You can't hold it in. Otherwise, you get constipated, and it's really a lot like our digestive system. It's very important to be
yeah.
regular and balanced.
You know, it's interesting that you say that because in my own relationship, things build up because let's just face it, I'm a workaholic. I spin too many plates and I neglect my family more than once. And she feels that and she suppresses it and suppresses it. And then she expresses it. And I always take the expressing it as you saying in tones like this and talking to me like this does not motivate me to do the things you're wishing me to do. I'm more of a positive, upbeat person. If you come in and be like, "Hey, it's Saturday. It's cool outside for the first time. Let's open up the doors and get the breeze through here and clean up the garage." I'm a more apt to say, "You know what? That sounds like a fun thing to do." But when you come in and like, "This garage is so dirty and it's so angry and I'm so tired and sick and tired," and when you express it that way, I'm not motivated to clean the garage. I immediately think, well, it's be like that way because I'm working so hard so I could take care of things. And so, I never really listened to her expressing that as a cry for, I've been suppressing it for a long time. And this is just my way of saying, please change something because this isn't working. Right. And
Right.
so Ironically, it always gets me to do the thing that she doesn't want me to do, that she wanted
Mhm.
me to do in the
Yeah,
first place. But I'm always upset because I'm doing it like out of like
obligation, not
obligation,
desire, not
not
desire.
because I don't like, yeah, that would be fun to do it.
Right,
I like talking positive and finding, I'm a good news
right,
guy, right? So
right, right,
talk
right.
to me in those kind of ways. But I love what you said about the different types of anger. And it takes a lot to ever get me to express anger. And that I always thought that was a gift. People always admire me for that. Like you hear horrible news and you're always like, you know what? I could just look at the bright side of anything. When people say, is your glass half full or half empty? I'm like, it's neither. It's fully full. It's half air, half water. That's like you're missing the point, you got to look at things from outside the box, from a little different point of view. So, um, so that's great. And so in sharing and understanding that, what about allowing them to vent? Like, is that part of the process too? It's like you have to,
Well,
is
there is
is
a,
screaming ever appropriate? It's like,
yeah,
does it ever get
absolutely.
to that?
Yes, but there is a sequence that I go through in my class. So it's very systematic. But if a person needs to scream and needs to yell, it's really what I advise. And again, there are multi steps to this, but it is important to ask permission because it is a disruptive behavior. And if you're gonna beep, or if you're gonna play loud music, or if you're gonna put on your smoothie, or you're gonna, do something disruptive, it's a good idea to contain it in a framework and ask for consent if you're going to do it in front of an individual.
Mm.
Otherwise, you can go outside and scream and kick and throw
As long
eggs
as your neighbors aren't
at the
too
tree.
close.
Right. So you can make a choice. You can make a choice, a conscious decision, if you'd like to express your anger in someone's presence, in which it would be polite if you say, "Is it okay if I express my anger?" Or separate yourself. I always say, "Do you shit in the living room?" Right?
Yeah. No. So
So
think about
it's
where you're expressing your anger.
you need
Yeah.
to be polite, and I think like being proactive about your emotional expression is really a part of emotional regulation. And when you're
Mm,
emotionally dysregulated and reactive, there are major, major consequences and ultimately brain damage.
mm, that's great. So, do you ever bring spirituality into the psychiatry in that
Yes,
aspect?
everything I do is spiritual. And I guess
Okay.
that's a pretty broad term. What is spirituality?
Yeah.
So I guess I will share my philosophy in that,
Okay.
imagine a fishing pole. Our bodies are just the ends of our multidimensional infinite beingness. We are infinite energy sources that are just like going up to heaven. And our bodies are just like little avatars in which the ends of us exist to play this game of life.
Like the lure on the fishing pole at
Yeah,
the
like
end of
the
the
end.
line?
We're just the end. But the truth
Okay.
of who we actually are energies. We're energy.
Mhm.
We're energy. We're not our bodies, right? Our body is
Yeah.
our container and our vehicle. And
Mhm.
so the way I see my purpose in doing this work is to get that human being to really connect to their higher self, that extended part of self, that energy part of themselves, to realize that they're not a victim to anything in their lives, not their
Mhm.
health, not their emotions, not their relationships. And through thinking creatively and through play, the world is at their fingertips to
Mm.
change and upgrade and create the life of their dreams. Nobody's a victim. And I truly believe that any single family, no matter what age, I worked with a mom who was 80 and a daughter who was 60, right? It's never too late.
Yeah.
I have parents coming with me. I made so many mistakes. My kids are messed up. I'm like, it is never too late. And anyone can learn these skills. Anybody, if they're
Wow.
motivated.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, Dr. Adena is the founder of Teal Dragon Pediatric Holistic Child Psychiatry. And so check out her website. We're going to put it right on the link below here. Also, she posts her daily tips on Instagram, and you can learn a lot more about her programs on her website. And did you want to share anything more about the website or where they can get a hold of you or contact you?
Yeah. So you can go to tealdragon.org. On the homepage is my curriculum for child-centered parent training, CCPT, which I have classes where I do Zoom classes from everybody in the world, people coming to me and wanting to improve their families and authentic relationships. And I also do provider training. So a lot of pediatricians are interested in, because they counsel parents a lot, and social worker psychologists. So I do trainings as well. And if you're interested, you could just apply online to the course. And if you want to make a consultation with me on my website, you could always book a free consultation to learn more about my work, tealdragon.org, and to see how I can help you.
Wow, that's awesome. And so we were so excited to have you here as a guest, and we're certainly going to have you back because I can think of so many more deeper rabbit trails I'd love to run down with you. And, it's such a serious thing. And there's nothing more heartbreaking than a parent who lost that connection and their children don't want to talk to them anymore. Or they're like, oh, my kids moved away. I haven't talked to them in 3 years. I can't even fathom that. It's like I have such a great bond with my children, and the thought of, and even with my parents. I mean, my parents were my best friends pretty much my whole life. Every decade, I think of all the big, achievements and the big milestones that we've had. My folks were right there with us. My kids were always right there with us. It's been such a family dynamic our whole lives. And I think of people that don't have those bonds, and I know that real family is not always of blood. It's of joy and respect for each other's lives. And so we have lots of brothers and sisters and uncles that might not be truly related, but they've always been there for us. And so I'm talking about them too. I'm talking about the ones that are in our lives that we can just be us. We can be who we want to be. We can be authentic. They know us to be true. We don't have to put on a fake persona of who we want the world to think we are. And so we live in a world now that nobody knows who they really are. We have these avatars that we make ourselves into as they play online and think it's all real. We have these things in social media that we make everybody think this is my wonderful life, and I'm posting it to the best artificial side of me. And it's like, where did the genuine real come to? Even though
Yeah.
all this reality TV stuff, it's what you want the drama to be. It's not real. And so communication is where it all boils back to, and learning the art and skill of how to learn how to do that. That's not something you can just say, hey, start communicating with your kid. And they're like, okay, thanks, doc. I appreciate that. Why didn't I think of that? There is actually proven courses in how to do that. And Dr. Adena has been very successful with this over the years. She's had, her aha moment of, you know what, the course that I was working on, of just, doing drugs is not the answer. It hasn't been working, and I need to do something different. So, thank you so much for, in essence, seeing the light, having these downloads to be able to help people on such a better way, and then getting results. And I'm so excited for you, and I'm so excited to be working with you and to be able to utilize your skill set too with all of our patients that are trying to reach that next level of health. So until next time, thank you again for being our guest, and thank you everybody for joining us today. And we look forward to our next episode. Bye now. Have a
Bye.
great
Thank
day.
you so much, Mark.
All right. Bye-bye.